Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name's Nader. In this video, we're going to go over a bunch of exercises together on modules in JavaScript. In the previous video, we went over the theory and a few examples of how to actually use modules. We saw things like how to import and export code in and out of different files. So this is just going to give us more practice with how to actually use them with kind of a few more complicated examples and some really nice real life use cases that we'll actually see once we start building more complicated projects together. Let's get right into the examples. Okay, so as with the other videos, I have a 4 exercises here. I have kind of a bunch of comments up here. I'm just going to read through the comments and then kind of give you a bit of a preamble, a few hints, and then I'll let you try it out yourself. And then we'll actually go over a potential solution together where I actually code it out and explain it. So for the warm up, to get our fingers warmed up, what we want to do is we want to actually, for these exercises, kind of create folders for most of these exercises. It's a little bit different from the previous set of exercises. And the reason we want to do this is that we want to kind of separate all of our code out so that our exercise files like 1, 2, 3, and 4 in this case don't actually get all cobbled up together, so we can actually rename them different things. So we'll see how this works when we actually start building these examples out together. So that said, let's actually see how this works. We want to create a new folder for this specific warm-up exercise called Warmup. And inside of that Warmup folder, we want to create 2 files. We want to create a main.js file and then a utils.js file, right? Like a utilities file. Inside of the utils.js file, we want to create a function called caps lock that takes a single parameter called string and returns the string but uppercase. Okay, so we've seen this a few times in previous videos. We then want to export this caps lock function as a named export out of our utils.js file. Then inside of our main.js file, we want to import caps lock and then actually call it with different strings just to actually test how it works and print out the results to the screen. We want to make sure to run the main.js file using Node because now we're in a situation where we actually have multiple files and we want to make sure we tell Node which file is kind of the entry point. And we'll see more of this in future videos once we get into more complicated examples using modules and libraries and things like that. But we want to make sure we're running main.js in this example, and I'll point it out in the future examples as well. One tip I just want to add here, we saw this in the kind of the video before this where we explained modules, but with Node, we have to actually tell it to use ES modules instead of the default, which was common.js. So when you actually create your warmup folder, you're also going to want to add a package.json file. So technically there's a third file inside of this new folder, and that's going to be package.json. And inside of there, you're going to want to add this code. This is looks like an object, but it's actually JSON, JavaScript object notation. You want to make sure you have type in double quotes, not single quotes, and then a colon, and then in double quotes, a module. Okay, this will tell it to use the ES module resolution system instead of the common.js system as we saw in the previous video to actually make our imports and export work, because by default Node does not use that. So just as a heads up, technically there's 3 files inside of this folder. So I want to create main.js, utils.js, package.json, do all this stuff, and then run main.js to actually import code out of utils to actually make sure that our code is talking to each other across the files. I know that was a lot of setup, but we're going to be doing this for all these exercises. So I just wanted to throw that at you. So give that a shot, do as good as you can on that one, and we'll go through an example together. Okay, so let's see how we can actually do this. So I'm actually just going to use the editor here to create these files. So over here, I'm going to create a new folder. This might be a bit small on the screen. I only have my main code kind of blown up here, so you can actually see it in big caps here, but hopefully you can actually see this. I'm going to call this warmup, and inside of my warmup folder here, I'm going to create a new file, and here I'm going to say main.js. Then I'm going to right click the warmup folder. I'm going to do new file. I'm going to say utils.js, and I'm going to right click the warmup folder and do one more new file and call this package.json. Okay, so you can see here, I have a warmup folder, and inside of there, if I kind of open and close it, you can see I have these 3 different files. And inside of package.json, I'm going to do kind of these curly brackets, and I'm going to say type is going to be module, just like that. Okay, and the spacing doesn't really matter. We just need to make sure we have double quotes, then the colon, and another set of double quotes. Make sure you don't have commas like this inside of JSON. We can't have commas if it's the last item inside of the JSON object. Okay, so that's one file down. We're going to kind of repeat this structure for all the other ones. So if we kind of look back at our warm-up here, we want to, inside of utils, create a function called caps lock that takes a single parameter called string and returns a string but uppercased. Okay, so inside of utils, I'm going to say const caps lock is equal to, and I'm going to make this an arrow function. This is going to take a string parameter. Okay, I'm just going to call it string. And we're going to return the string. And for strings, we've seen before that we can call a .to uppercase function. And we're going to return this out of this function. So when we call this, for example, we can do caps lock, then we can say hi, and then this would kind of give us back hi, just like that. Okay. And I'm going to do export, and we wanted to do this. I'm just going to switch back to the instructions here. We wanted to do this as a named export right here, step 4, and not a default export. Okay, so to do that, we kind of do export like this, and then we have the set of curly brackets. Spacing doesn't really matter in here. We can kind of do multiple lines or on one line, and inside of here, we just put the thing that we want to export. My saving puts it back on one line since I only have one thing exported, but that's totally fine. So in this case, I could also rename it, but in this case, I'm just actually going to leave it as caps lock. So we have caps lock inside of utils.js, and then the instructions are inside of main.js to actually import that, right? So if you look at this, we want to import caps lock inside of main and then call it with a string to test it out and run main.js using Node. So here we're going to say import, and I'm just going to put a set of curly brackets, and I'm going to say from, and then here we put the file that we want to import from. And with Node.js and this kind of ES module system, if we're importing from our local file directory, we have to prefix this import with a /. This just means within the current folder. If we just said utils.js like this actually means something else, which we'll actually see in a future video shortly. So for now, we actually have to tell it that we want to go into the current folder /, and then the file name that we're looking for is utils, and we always have to provide the extension, which is .js. Okay, and now we have access to everything that's exported from utils, which is going to be our caps lock, just like that. Okay, so now we can actually use caps lock. So I can say const caps, for example, and this is going to take my caps lock function, and we're going to call it with hello there, just like this, for example. And then we can console.log out our caps. Okay, so this is pretty cool, right? We have a lot of code in here. We're using the code here, and then we can kind of log out the result if we want to. So if I pull up my terminal, let's take a look at this. If I was to run, I'm just going to show you, if I do an ls in here, actually, before I do that, what we see is that I have exercise 1, 2, 3, warm-up exercise, and then the warm-up folder. Okay, in this particular terminal here in VS Code, I actually don't have it set up to show a color. You might have colors showing up for your folders, but Warmup is actually a folder. Okay, it's not a file. So if I try to run node and then main.js, what we'll see is that node is going to say cannot find module, basically main.js is what it's trying to say, module not found. Right? Which makes sense, right? If we look at this, we can see that there is no main.js listed here, right? So there's really two ways to make this work. I'm currently in this code folder that I have, right? You can see the path here that I'm inside this code folder. These are my 5 files in here. I can do 2 ways to actually run this. I can change directory using cd that we saw in the terminal video into my warmup folder, just like this. And now if I do an ls, now I can see that main.js file. So if I run node and then main.js, what we'll see is hello there, all caps, and that's the solution to our first problem, right? But there's another way to actually do this. If I want to go back up a folder, I can do cd ... and now I'm back in code. I'm just going to clear my terminal here so you can actually see this a bit better. And now I'm kind of back up one folder, right? I'm outside of warmup and I've kind of gone back up into my code folder, and I have all these files again. So now I can't run node main.js. However, check this out. I can run node and I can tell it I want to go inside the warmup folder, and I can do slash, and then I can do main.js just like this. So this is telling Node, I know that warmup is a folder, and I want you to execute using Node main.js, which is inside of the warmup folder. And if I run this, we'll get hello there. So these two things are the exact same. Changing to the folder and then running Node and pointing at inside the folder with this specific file name are the exact same thing. All right, just wanted to show you those two methods. Perfect. So that's the warm up. Let's actually go through exercise 1. Hopefully it'll go a bit faster now that we kind of have some of this out of the way. Perfect. So I'll close my warm up folder here, go to exercise 1. Okay, so for the first exercise, what we want to do again is create a folder for this, and this is going to be called exercise 1. Then inside of exercise 1, we want to create 2 files again. Okay, technically 3. We want to create a package.json, which I'll mention in a second, but 2 main files, same thing, main.js and utils.js. Okay, inside of utils.js, we want to create a function called square. And this function is going to take a single parameter called number, and it's going to return that number squared, right? So if you recall, squaring something is just multiplying that thing by itself. So like if it was 2, it'd be 2 times 2, which is 4. If it was 3, by 3 times 3, which is 9. 4 would be 4 times 4, 16, etc. Okay. Then also inside of utils.js, we want to create a second function, and this is going to be called greeting. Okay, and this is going to take a single parameter called name, and it's simply going to print out this message directly. It's not actually going to return anything. It's just going to print out this message, hello, and then the name kind of as a template string like this. So if I called this with monkey, it would say like hello monkey. If I called it with natter, it would say hello natter, right? Then what we want to do is we want to export square as a named export from utils, and then greeting as a default export from utils, okay? So we saw that there was a difference between those and the semantics with how that actually works when we're both exporting and importing between the different files. So this is just to get more practice with those two types of exports. Then what we want to do is inside of our main.js file, we want to import both of those functions. Square, which is going to be the named export, and then greeting, which is going to be the default export. And you want to try to do this on one line, all right? Then we want to make sure they work just like we did with our warm-up exercise with caps lock and run main.js using Node once again. And don't forget, we do want to make sure that we have a package.json file inside of this folder, because Node is going to look for that inside the current folder to make sure we can actually use the import and export module system in JavaScript, because the default is common.js, which is different. Okay, so give that a shot. I know there's quite a lot there, but hopefully you've kind of seen the groove of it with the warm-up. Okay, so to start, I'm going to create another folder here. This is going to be called exercise 1. And inside of here, I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to create these 3 files. I'm going to do a main.js, I'm going to do a utils.js, and I'm going to do a package.json. Okay, so we can see I have an exercise 1 with all the files in it, and then I have a warm-up with all the exercise files in it, right? Package.json, let's get that out of the way first. I'm going to say type is module here, right? Just make sure we have that inside of the exercise 1 folder, because each folder is going to need its own package.json. At least with the way that we're running our code right now, we'll see an easier way to do this in the future. And if we look back at the instructions, now we want to create these 2 functions. Let's start with square. We want to create a function called square, takes a single parameter called number, and returns number squared. And this is going to be inside utils.js. Okay, so I'm going to say const square. Was it square or squared? It was square. Equals. I'll create my arrow function here, and this is going to take a single parameter. It's going to call it number, and we want to return this number squared. So we can do this a couple of ways. The easiest way to do this is probably just to say return number times number. You can also just do number star star 2. That is just to the power of 2. Okay, whichever one works. There's that. They do the exact same thing. Okay, perfect. So the next thing we want to do is we want to create this greeting function. Okay, when this takes a single parameter called name, and then it's going to print out this hello name string. Okay. So called greeting. So we're going to say const greeting, and this is going to take a name, and inside of here, we're going to console.logout. I'm going to do template string here, which is going to say hello, and then we're going to template in that name and then an exclamation point. Okay, so inside here, we want to put the name. So if I call this with monkey, hello monkey, with natter, hello natter. Okay. So next, what we want to do is we want to export square as a named export. So this part we've done, but greeting as a default export. So let's take a look at that. So I did mention in the previous video that you can technically do this within the same line, right? So we could do something like this. We could say like export const square, right? And I encourage you not to do that for various reasons. I love by convention just to keep my exports at the bottom of the code that I'm working with, the file. Convention kind of most people will go with having imports at the top and then exports at the bottom. Okay, that way we're not hunting through the file to figure out what's exported and what's not. So I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to say export, and as a named export, we can use the curly bracket syntax that we saw with the warm-up. So square was a named export, but then we also saw that greeting is a default export. So to do that, we just say export, and we use default as a keyword, and then the thing that we want to export by default, which in this case is the greeting. We can only have one of these in a file. And in this case, the default export is greeting, but we can have as many named exports as we want. All right, great. So now that we have that, we want to import them both into into main.js and call them to make sure they work, but we want to do this all in one line. So if we go to main.js, I'm just going to say import, and I'm going to do this. I always do this like this. I say from, and then I have the file name. So remember /, and then utils.js. So from this probably makes more sense now when you have multiple folders like this. We're saying from the current folder's utils.js. Note that we also have our utils.js inside of our warmup folder, but that's a totally different folder. When we run node inside of exercise 1, it knows that it's running like within the exercise 1 context. So when we say within the current folder, it's thinking the current folder means exercise 1, okay? Because we're executing main.js there, right? We can kind of change this and fudge this around in different ways to tell it kind of which is the main folder, which is called the root folder. But we'll see in future videos how we can kind of get to those. Now, here's the interesting part for this exercise. We want to import square as a named and then default as greeting as a default. So for the name, this one's easy, right? We can put square here. That's perfect. What we can't do is this. We can't do greeting. This is not going to work, right? So let's try this out. So if I say, let's just say const, and I'll just say num is equal to square, and let's do square of 20, for example. It's going to be number. Okay, and then console.log out num. And then I'm going to use greeting. I'm going to just call greeting, and I'm going to just call it with monkey. All right. All right. So I'm going to pull up my terminal and clear this out just so we can see a bit better. And I'm going to use kind of the simpler syntax where I'm going to just tell it the folder directly from up inside my code folder, which actually has both warmup and exercise 1 folders inside of it. So I'm going to tell node, please go to the exercise 1 folder, and then / inside of there, I want to go to main.js. Now do note that if you're running on Windows, the slashes might be slightly different. You might have the \, for example. So just note that it doesn't really matter at the end of the day which slash you're using. Just make sure it's consistent with the operating system that you're using. So if it's on Windows, it should be the other way. Mac and Linux, I believe, should be the regular /. All right. You'll get used to it the more that you run code this way through your terminal. So if I run this, let's see what happens. So we're going to get this error, right? It's going to kind of give us a nice pointing at the greeting. It's going to be like, hey, something's up with this, right? This is some funkiness going on. Syntax error. The required module /utils.js does not provide an export named greeting. This is actually a really fantastic error message, right? If you actually read this, this actually kind of makes sense. This is like quite a good feeling error. This is in as plain English as you could probably get, right? It doesn't provide an export named greeting. Now, ideally, they should say default. Well, actually, they're saying export in this case because it's actually the default export. So if we look at this, we don't have an export named greeting. We have a default export named greeting, right? Which is different. So the way that we import a default export is outside of the curly brackets. So if I remove this from the curly brackets, I outside here can put greeting, and I put a greeting auto-complete it for me. And then I do a comma, just like that. Okay, so whatever is outside the curly brackets is going to be the default export. And then whatever is inside the curly brackets can be the named exports. And we can have multiple of the named ones, but only one default. Okay, so now if I try to rerun this code, we actually see that we do get the correct answer, right? So this is coming right here, hello monkey, from our greeting function, which is pretty amazing. Now, what's interesting is we can actually rename this here too if we wanted to, right? So I can call this like my greeting, for example, right? Even though it's a default export, we saw in the previous video that this is also going to work as well. And we can also rename square, for example, as SQ or something like that. And I can do SQ just like this, just so you can see that that also works just fine. Okay, just slightly different syntax for the renaming, just as a little bonus for you. Perfect. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's check out exercise 2. Now, just a word of warning. This one is a little bit kind of a doozy when you look at it. So I'm going to go through it a bit slow just so it really makes sense. This is quite a crucial one to really practice with because this pattern is going to show up quite a lot as we work with larger code bases and more complicated projects. Eventually you'll get the hang of it and you're going to see it's a really nice way to organize your code, but it is a little bit intense the first time you see it, just as a word of warning. All right, so let's take a look at this. Also a lot of instructions on one screen here, but I'll go through this with you. So for this one, same thing, we want to create an exercise 2 folder, right? Just like we did for these two. I'll just minimize these now. And inside of here, we want to create 4 files. Well, technically 5 with the package JSON. So we want to create a main.js, a modules.js, a module a.js, and then a module b.js. Okay. And then inside of modules b.js, we want to create an array called top movies. It's just going to be a regular array of strings, right? Spirited Away, The Matrix, Star Wars, and Zoolander. Okay. We want to export top movies as a named export. Okay. So step 3, not too bad. We've seen that a couple times. Let's take a look at step 4. Inside of module a.js, we want to actually import top movies from module b. Okay. So already we're doing some importing, but hopefully you're following. Then we want to create a function inside of module A called checkMovie that has a string parameter called movie name. Okay, so just a function. And this function is going to return true if the movie is inside of that top movies array that we imported, this one right here. Otherwise, it's going to return false. Okay. Then we also want to export this checkMovie function outside of module A as a named export as well. Okay, so now we have 2 modules, module B with top movies and then module A that has checkMovie. Okay. Now, inside of modules.js, we want to import checkMovie from module A, and we want to also import top movies from module B. Okay, so that's the function and the array respectively. However, here's where things get interesting. We want to export them both right away as named exports. So this is kind of a strange file. This is going to have not really much code in it. It's just going to have imports and then exports, which is going to be kind of strange. Okay, so I want you to figure out how that's going to work. It is exactly actually how it sounds. So there's not really a trick to it. It just feels a bit weird. Okay, and we'll go through why that's the case in a solution. Then what we want to do is inside of main.js, we want to actually import both checkMovie and top movies on one line from modules.js. Okay, so the reason this is kind of so trippy is what we have going on is basically a map of imports. We have module A, we have module B, then we have modules. Modules is importing and exporting module A and B, but then main is going to only be importing from modules. So what we're doing is we're kind of funneling all of our functions and variables through modules, and then main is going to be picking them out of modules, even though modules is actually picking them from many different other files. All right, I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but if you kind of follow these step by step, it'll slowly kind of build the bigger picture, and we'll see the solution as well. So once we do that inside a main, we want to actually call that check movie function with different movie names to actually make sure it works, so we can test if it's true or false. And we also want to print out the top movies array that we imported to make sure it actually prints out this array right here. And again, we want to run main.js using node. Right? So just as a tip again, just to really hammer it home, I said create these 4 files, right? These 3 module files technically in the main.js, but we also need technically a 5th file, which is this package.json, which has that type module. That's just going to be inside the folder. Okay, so I know a lot of instructions, but I promise you, if you can work through this, it really is going to pay off, because this is going to be a pattern that we see quite a lot. Okay, so give that a shot and we'll go through it together. All right, so let's kind of start slowly here. So we're going to create a new folder. I'm going to say exercise 2. Inside here, I'm going to create a few files. And there later on, we'll see kind of a method to create these a bit faster. But for now, we'll just go with this. We'll do main.js. We'll do modules.js. We'll do module.a.js. And then we'll do module.b.js. All right, lots of files. Inside of module B, we want to create an array called top movies. So I'm just going to copy this so you don't watch me type it out. And we're going to export it as a named export. Okay, so this is inside module B. So I'm going to say const top movies is equal to this array. Okay. Then what I'm going to say is I'm going to export top movies just like this. And that's it. That's it for module B. All right. Now I want to go to module A, and I want to create a movie called a function called checkMovie that has a string parameter called movie name, and it's going to check to see basically if that movie name is inside of top movies, which we're going to need to import. So let's do that. Let's go to module A, and we're going to import something from the current folder's module B.js. Don't forget the extension here, as well as the kind of prefix for the current folder. And inside here, we know that it was called top movies. Okay, perfect. So now we want to create a function called checkMovie, and this is going to be taking a movie name. And what it's going to do is it's going to check to see if that movie name is inside of that top movies list. So what we're doing is we're going to check to see if the string that we get is inside of here. Okay. So how do we do that? Well, I'm just going to, pretend I don't actually know how to do this. I actually don't remember how to do this off the top of my head most of the time. I always forget, is it like contains, includes, or something else? So I'm just going to kind of pull up Google real quick. I'll just do something like JS array contains or something like that. And then I have a bunch of results here. Let me zoom in a tiny bit more. Looks like it's includes. Okay, I see a bunch of includes. Let's just test it out. So I want to check if top movies includes the movie name in it, right? So I'm asking the question, is this array, does it have the movie name that we're passing in? So I'm going to say does top movies dot includes movie name. Now this is going to return true or false, right? And for example, if I pull up MDN right here, let's take a look at the documentation. We can see that includes checks to see if it has a certain value among its entries, returning true or false as appropriate. Right, so array 1 includes 2. If this is array 1, this will return true. Pets includes cat, true. It includes at, false. Okay, so I can actually just return this directly. I could assign it to a variable, or I could just return it directly because this is already going to be a Boolean value. This is going to evaluate to true or false. All right, now what we want to do is want to export this as a named export. So I'm going to say export, and this is going to be checkMovie. Perfect. So just even this simple file, I'd like you to just appreciate that there's quite a lot going on, right? What we're doing is we're importing code from another file. And in this case, it's just one simple array, but it could be many different things, and that file could do a whole bunch of other stuff as well. Then we're actually making use of it inside of this function, and we're also exporting that function, right? So there's a lot of stuff happening here, and JS is going to take care of that for us behind the scenes. JavaScript is, okay? Perfect. Now, that is good for number 4. Now we want to do number 5. So inside of modules.js, we want to import checkMovie from module A and then top movies from module B. All right, so I'm going to go to modules.js. I'm going to say import something from and then module a.js. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to do this for module b.js. Now, module A exports check movie, right? So from module A, I can grab check movie, and module B exports top movies. So I can grab top movies. Okay, so now I have access to both of these inside of modules.js. But according to our instructions, we want to export them both as named exports as well from modules. So this is where things get a little bit kind of trippy. So check this out. What we can do is we can say export, and we can just simply put in check movie, comma, and then top movies. We can actually list as many of these as we want. If we had other things in here, we could also export them and just have like dozens or even hundreds of exports technically if we really wanted to. All right. Now this file looks really, really, really strange. Okay. But I'm going to show you why this is really, really awesome in a second. So if we go to step 6, we want to go to main.js. Finally, we're at our main.js file, and we want to import check movie and top movies in one line, but from modules.js. So we don't know in this case from main.js anything about module A or module B. So let's take a look. We're going to say import something, and then from, the only one we care about is /modules.js. All right, so what do we have access to inside of modules that's being exported? Well, we only have 2 exports, right? The imports at the top, exports at the bottom by convention. So I have check movie and top movies. So I can actually grab check movie and top movies here. Okay, why? Because they're being exported here. Now they were also being imported here, but that's because in order to export something, it has to exist inside of that file. So in order to actually have access to these variables, we actually had to import them, or we could declare them here for the first time, but we already did that inside of module A and B so that we can actually export it just directly here. Now there is a short form for this, which I'll show in a second, but I just want you to kind of get this premise first. All right. Now we just want to make sure this actually works. So I'm actually just going to console.log top movies just to make sure that that actually is the correct array that we think it is. And we want to console .log out. Let's do a check movie with, let's just say Jurassic Park, for example. And I'll do check movie with Zoolander. All right. So this should give us false, right? Because it's not inside of our array here, but Zoolander is, so we should actually get true. Perfect. Let's see if this actually works. There's a lot going on here with this code, so let's take it a bit slow. So if I do an ls, we have exercise 2 as a folder, right? Exercise 2, exercise 1, and warmup. And I can run node, and I can tell it inside of exercise 2 / main.js. And if I run that, I'm going to get an error. I cannot use an import statement outside of a module. You're probably like, oh my gosh, you totally forgot Natter to put in your package JSON file. And you would be correct if you did say that. If you didn't say that, don't worry. If you ran this error, you'll get practice with this as you go. So we forgot the package JSON file. This is because it's trying to use common.js by default, as I mentioned. So if I add a package JSON in here and I say type is module, and I save that file, now I have these 5 files inside of exercise 2. If I clear out this error and I try to rerun it one more time, we should actually see, go back to my main.js code here, our actual top movies array. And Jurassic Park is not inside of that array, and then Zoolander is inside of that array, right? That is pretty amazing. Pretty amazing indeed, right? If you think about this, now this is a relatively trivial example, but you can imagine how much we could expand this. And we can expand this in many ways. We could have a lot of code inside of each of these modules and be exporting many different things. We could also have many, many different modules and be importing a whole bunch of them in one place. So what this pattern allows us to do is we can have many different files. Imagine A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way to Z or Z, right? For example. And then we can have one place like modules. In this case, I named it modules. Some people name it something else, right? And we can import all of those into one place so that inside of our main file, we only have to import it from one spot. Okay, we don't actually have to import it from all the A, B, C, D, E, F, G places at once. Okay, and that's because modules is going to know where all those folders are and just re-export them so that all the imports are available from one file. Now, what's really cool about this is we can actually do this all in one line. So I'm actually going to comment out this code inside of modules.js. I want to show you something really neat. It's a bit of a bonus, but we're going to be using this so much that I really want to show it to you. So we can actually do this. We can say export, and I can do this again, and then I can say from. Very similar how we did import something from, right? And here I can say from /module_a.js. I think I said one line. I actually kind of lied. This is from 2 in the way that we have set it up, but close enough. And I'm going to do a second one for module B. And from module A, I want to export check movie. Oops, here we go, check movie. And from module B, I want to export top movies. Okay, so what these 2 lines of code do is the exact same thing as these 3 lines of code. Okay, we are just exporting it directly from a file, from this one file though, right? So this is literally the same thing as this, just slightly shorter syntax. And if I run this code, we'll see that it actually works the exact same way, which is pretty cool. Now, which one is really up to you. Eventually, hopefully you'll see that this probably is a little bit more concise if you really want to follow this pattern. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Let's check out exercise 3. So for this one, looks simple, but I have some few tricks for you. So let's see how far you can get with this one without my help to start. We want to create a new folder in this one, same as the previous ones, called exercise 3, which is where we're going to be dumping our files. In this case, we want 3 files, main.js, module.a.js, and module.b.js. So do note again, we do want to have this package JSON as well, right? So technically 4 files with the type module, but at least these 3 files for JavaScript files. Now, inside of module.a.js, we want to run some actual code, right? We want to print out, so console log out module A, okay, inside of module.a.js. Then we want to create and export a named variable called A that points to the string A. So like const A equals A, for example, just export that, right? Then inside of module b.js, we want to import that A variable from module a.js. Okay. We also want to print out something in module B, which is just going to be the string module B, right? So inside of module B, just print that out, console log that out. Then we want to create and export another named variable inside of module B called B that string points to the string B, right? So like const B const B equals B, right? I think I would say we don't want to use A in this file either, right? So even though we're importing A, we're not going to use A. So that's on purpose, just to show you something interesting. Inside of main.js, we want to import B from module b.js. Then immediately, the only line of code we want to have inside of main.js, apart from this import statement for B, is going to be printing out main. And again, note that we don't use the actual B that we do import. Okay, we only have a console log after the import that's not using B. It's just going to print out main. Now, the exercise here is more of just trying to wrap your brain around what is really happening with these import statements. This is something called module resolution, which is kind of how these things are running behind the scenes. And the purpose of this exercise is really to try to trace the code in your mind and try to think about what is actually happening when we are doing these imports. Like, what is JavaScript actually doing behind the scenes? Okay, so is it going to print out B or A or main first, and in what order, and why is it going to be in that order? Okay, once you've answered that, try to think about why this makes top level await, which is a bit of a tricky concept that we explored last in the module video, as a bonus if you want more practice, why it kind of makes that a tricky concept and why it's not always maybe the best thing to use. Okay, So the core of this is really just try to predict the order of these print statements before you actually run this code with all these imports all over the place. Okay, then actually run it, test your theory, and if you didn't get it right, try to answer like, why is it giving you that answer? All right, so give that a shot and then we'll go through it together. So now let's create a folder for this one, exercise 3. Oops, spell it correctly, exercise 3, and it's just a folder, not .js. And in here, I want to create a main.js. I want to create a module a.js and then a module b.js. Just so I don't forget, I'm also going to create my package.json file. In here, we're just going to have our type module, and just be careful with the formatting of this because they have to have the double quotes around them. Okay, so then we said inside of module A, we want to print out just module A, right? Then we want to create and export a named variable called A that just points to the string like the letter A. Okay, so we want to console.log out module A. Then we want to say const A is equal to A, right? Really tricky one right there. And we want to named export this, right? So to do that, we want to say export and then we just say A, just like that. All right, cool. So we now want to do the exact same thing, but with B, right? But the only real difference is that if we go back to the instructions, we also want to import A inside of module B. Okay, so let's do that first. So if I go to, so this is A, so I can import A because I've exported it from here. So if I go to module B, I'm gonna say import something from, and then the string is, the string is gonna be the current folder module A.js. And what do I want to import? Well, just the A variable. Then I want to console.log out module B. Then I want to say const B is equal to the letter B. And I want to named export out our B. Right? Really creative here with our variable names. All right, let's check out the last step here. Then what we want to do is inside of main.js, we want to import B from module B and then print out main. Okay, so we want to say import something from /module b.js. And what do I want to import? Well, B in this case. And then I want to console.log out main, just like that. Okay, so just a couple things to note, right? A is going to export, it's going to log this out. It's going to create a variable and export it. That seems pretty understandable. B is going to import A, going to log something out, create a new variable, and export that. It's not going to actually use this A. It's just going to import it. Okay. Main is going to import B and then log out main, but then not actually use B. All right. So the question here was, what is going to be the order of these prints? So really the question is kind of like, we're probably going to see this main printed out. That kind of makes sense. I don't really know where it's going to be, but it's probably going to be there somewhere, right? But then we're telling JavaScript, okay, well, inside of this main file, which is what we're going to be running first, right? I want you to go and find module b.js and import B from it. So let's see if that makes sense. If we look at B, module b.js, well, what is this telling JavaScript to do? Well, the first thing it's telling JavaScript to do is, hey, whoa, like before you do anything, right? I want you to go to module A and import stuff from there. Okay, so now we're going to follow this like kind of breadcrumb trail and we're going to go to module A. So now we land in module A and okay, what do we need to do in here? Okay, well, there's no more imports. So phew, we're good, right? We can console log module A. So I'm going to claim that that's going to be the first thing that we see, right? Before we even see main, we're going to follow this breadcrumbs of imports into B, then we're going to follow it into A, then we're going to land here on this line right here. We're going to log out A, right? But then you're probably thinking, well, we only wanted to import this variable. We didn't want to really run the code. But keep in mind that JavaScript needs to run the code inside of the file that we're importing from in order to actually get to the exports, There's many reasons for this that are slightly beyond kind of the scope of some of this module stuff, but just we need to at least know that it runs all the code inside of there. We'll get into why in future videos, and if you're interested, I can share some resources as well as to how you can read further on that if you'd like. But we have to run this code to get the exports, which means we're going to run this, we're going to run this, and then we're going to export A. Okay, and then we're done. So now we can follow the breadcrumb back up to where we left off, which is here, line 1 on module B. Then we can run module b.js, or module b, sorry, console log. We can create our b variable, then we can export that, and then we're good. We don't have anything else to do in b. So now we go back up to main, and we have our b now. We're not using it, but we could have it if we needed it, and now we log main. So my claim is, because I kind of know the answer to this, and I just explained it to you, what is really going to happen is as soon as we run main.js, we're going to follow this breadcrumb trail. We're going to come to B. We're going to follow this breadcrumb trail. We're going to come to A. We're going to log out module A. We're going to run this code, go back to B. Then we're going to log out module B. We're going to run this code, go back to main. Then we're going to log out main. Okay, so it's kind of like an inside out breadcrumb. So let's see what happens when we actually run this. So I'm going to do an ls. You can see that I have my exercise 3 folder in here now. And I'm going to run node exercise 3 / and then in this case main.js. And if I run that, we'll see that we get module A, then module B, and then main. Okay, now that is pretty cool. And this is really quite tricky. I wouldn't actually expect most people to actually get this answer correct. It really is quite nuanced, but if you can actually follow that breadcrumb, it really makes a huge difference because we use imports literally everywhere in our code when we're building tools, right? And projects together. So if you're able to figure out that, okay, this import is actually going to go and run the code in that file that I'm importing from and give me access to that export, then it's going to go run more code if that's importing more code. It really kind of gives you an appreciation and a deeper understanding of how kind of complex and nuanced these module systems really are. It's just a little bit more than kind of just making the code available. It's actually a whole tree of import resolutions that it has to deal with behind the scenes, and it follows that entire kind of nest and tree of roots as it gets to the ends of each one, and then kind of comes back up and gives you access to those variables in the kind of root of that tree. Okay, really interesting stuff. Again, if you want more on that, definitely let me know, and I'll send some resources, but we'll get into this in future videos as well. Now, if you didn't get the answer to that, don't worry, that was definitely a bit complex. To wrap this up though, I do want to kind of mention that last bonus here, which is why might this make top level await tricky to use. Now, if you think about how this works, right, now that we've seen that it literally traces the code, we saw that with top level await, which is where we could use await inside of a module anywhere, right? So we could do like const like hello is equal to await like something here, and this could be a promise that takes some time. We can do this here. It's not going to complain because we're inside of a module, but this is actually going to pause that code at that line, right? So what that's going to cause JavaScript to do is it's not going to continue with kind of that module resolution, because what it's going to need is access to those variables so that it can actually get down here to the rest of the code to actually allow you to do the exports and pull it into the other files. Okay, now there's definitely a little bit of nuance to that, and it gets a bit tricky, but that's kind of conceptually at least why it can be a bit tricky with these awaits. And there are cases where this is very useful, but also if you use it incorrectly, it might take longer to start up your application, or you could kind of put that on a back burner and do that awaiting somewhere else so it doesn't tie up the program, for example. Now, don't want to get too deep into that because it was definitely a little bit of a less used and more advanced topic, but just so that you have that at the kind of back of your memory. Now, I hope that was useful. I know that there was quite a lot going on with these exercises. I wanted to really tease your brain with these. The reason I want to go this far is in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to go over well, the next video and the ones after that, a couple of concepts that are not really specifically JavaScript per se, but so ingrained in the JavaScript ecosystem that we kind of would be really not good if we didn't go over them together, because we really are going to be using them every single day going forward pretty much. And the next topic is going to be NPM, which is a tool which actually allows us to import and export different kinds of code written by developers all over the world and bring code into our projects that we can actually reuse bits of functionality so that we don't have to build everything from scratch. We can take advantage of wonderful code that fellow developers have written and actually bring that into our project so that we can focus on the interesting part of our project instead of kind of reinventing the wheel with things like dates or times or calendars or reading from the file system or talking to a server or like all these different things. There's literally libraries for everything that we're going to end up using. I'm super excited to actually get to those because it's going to open up an entire world, quite literally, of possibilities. So I hope you found these exercises useful. If you did, I'd love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel as well. I'd love to hear in the comments, like, did you know this stuff about modules? Did you find these exercises interesting and valuable and challenging for yourself? What are some maybe new things that you learned? And have you seen these modules used but never really understood how they worked? Or is there something you've seen that I didn't really go through at all? I'd love to hear. But as mentioned, in the next video, we're going to go over NPM, the tool itself and kind of the philosophy behind it, as well as how to try out a few libraries. And then with that, we're also going to go through a few exercises for that as well. Can't wait to get to that set of videos. I'll see you there. See you later.